Let me introduce, super excited, what an inspiration, inspired me to ungrade and do that journey, Johanna Brown, who is an award-winning chemistry and computer science teacher, and she has been recognized by the American Chemical Society for her excellence in teaching chemistry. More than the subject she teaches, she thinks about systems of school, what it means to learn, and how to create change. She has a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Western Washington University and a master's in education from Washington State University. I also know that you're working on your national boards, which is very exciting. She currently teaches and is the science department lead at Pullman High School in Pullman, Washington. She is actively engaged in a number of professional organizations, including the American Association of Chemistry Teachers and the National Association of Science Teachers. So with that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Johanna. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Doran does such a nice job. And I do want to thank Doran, but even before we get going, just for having me and for connecting with me, and just it's so cool to see what he does with these programs. So I'm just going to share, and I don't know why we always announce that, but I always announce that I'm going to share to everyone. I think it just helps me know what's going on. So ungrading the chemistry classroom. And I think though this says it's for my chemistry classroom and computer science classroom, I think this can really work for any classroom. I'm going to keep it pretty broad so that you can ask questions that connect more with what you're doing in your classroom when we get to the end. So just some things to think about. Dr. Susan Bloom is someone who wrote a great book that I have linked. She edited it and actually had multiple different people write the chapters. And she's really a pioneer in ungrading at the higher ed level. And she just had this tweet that really resonated with me about if we helped students on their specific journey into life instead of sorting them. And I just find that so powerful and freeing and a little bit rebellious, like fight the man. We don't need to sort students for companies and colleges. I'm not here for it. And then the smaller blue square is just a quote from one of my own students about their experience this year. A student who has been very grade and achievement focused. And when she wrote this, it just meant a lot to me as well about being willing to make mistakes, learn from helpful feedback, and that the letter grade isn't telling them anything important about themselves. So just to kind of inspire us as we get going here. So kind of just where I'm going, why do it in science? I will give you some context because it is so contextual. If your administrator doesn't want you to ungrade, it's going to be difficult to do so. So I have some options for that, how you can kind of slowly get them used to the idea, and just some thoughts I've had about ungrading as we go, with resources at the end, and how I communicate with ungrading. I think that's one of the biggest things. We'll talk about how I still have to use a learning management system and a gradebook reporter, and how I've kind of figured out to manipulate them to my will. So I just want to take a second, have everyone think, and you can pop it in. Maybe we should pop it into the chat. So what are you seeing in our new modes of learning? If you're hybrid, what are just some patterns and trends you're seeing of what students are doing in our new modes, whatever you are? I'm just curious what everybody's thinking that they're seeing out there. What are these new modes? Of course, the chat can't pull up. Let's see. Here it is. They're not very independent. Okay. Yeah. Anything else positive or negative? What are we? What any trends in learning are we seeing? Anything else that just sticks out to people? And if you're like, no, I want to hear you talk, that's fine. Doing lots of breakout groups, more project-based learning. Fun. That asynchronous learning, yep. The responsibility has been thrust upon them. And I don't know about you, but I have students apologize to me saying, I'm sorry, I just can't get it all done, or I don't know how to do it all, or I just couldn't get to it. And I just try to tell them, you have been forced into a system that you were not trained for yet. So we'll get you there. Okay, so some things I was thinking about are these further disparities in access. We're definitely seeing, I just anecdotally, I looked at who wasn't coming back, and we live in, we live in a university town. So we have students who I think whose parents are more frightened of COVID and are like, you're not coming to school. And then we also have students whose parents need them to help at home and take care of other children and take care of things. So the students are going to stay remote as we go into hybrid. This is just going to further people's access to learning and to me, which I'm really worried about. And I think a lot of us are. Student engagement, we're seeing changes to student engagement. I know it's hard for them. And I even have students who say, I want to pay attention, but the Xbox is right there. My phone is right there. Like, I need somebody to be next to me and say, don't do that, but they don't have anyone. And I think we all have seen it. We have students whose engagement is up, right? They're not not having that social anxiety. There's changes from every end. More access to information. So when questions are Googleable versus not, I had someone email me about software to help them make sure that students didn't cheat. And I responded, you should ask questions that aren't Googleable. And they haven't emailed me back. And I felt a little snarky, but I stand by that. Students have more access to information, but so do we. That's our lives now. And I kind of love that it broke teacher control a bit. It has removed us. And some people are comfortable with that and some people are not. And I kind of think that less teacher control in some ways can help us break out of this system where we are forcing students into this factory model of education. Okay, let's just think about some of our goals in the science classroom. Students refusing carceral pedagogical strategies and digital modes. Yes, I just saw that. Okay, what are some of your big goals? And if you're not a science teacher, that's fine, but maybe just goals for learning. What are your goals right now? Like, what if a student could just do one thing, what would you be happy with? Like, now you can do this, go out into the world. Any good, efficient ideas out there? Oh, yeah. I can give you a few I'm thinking about. Learning something. Self-directed learning. Mine was thinking. Designing a model. Ooh, just feeling successful. Oh, self-advocating. Yeah, critical thinking. Problem solving. Asking questions. Yes. Oh my gosh, you all are amazing. Let's form a team. I don't know what we'll do, but something good. Oh, how science is relevant. Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay, I think we're all kind of on the same page. I'm thinking, oh yeah, Desmos, I need to get into that. Process over performance, right? And as we get better at NGSS 3D instruction, I think we're all getting better at this idea of process over performance. And what I have concerns about, I still have more on the slide, but I am concerned about how a grade is a marker of performance and that end goal. And it stops the working and the thinking and the learning. So that's kind of what I'm pushing for in connections with these things here. And ungrading has made me a better teacher of phenomena this year. It's really helped me. Anyway, same things you all are saying. I'm thinking about questioning, refining, going back. I hated this when I was in high school, when I had to write a rough draft and go back and fix it, just because I didn't know the value of just getting ideas out there. Nobody had helped me see that I didn't have to be perfect the first time. So how can we instill those skills? Somebody else said modeling, which I agree. Collaborating, right? I think about how competitive grades and schools can be. So how do we push students to collaborate and find the value in that? Okay, I think we're all on the same page. So I will get into ungrading. So something I think about a lot, because we are in a university town, just the nature of our small size, students are moving in and out of the district very consistently. So just thinking about a student coming into your class midway through the year, and they had not learned what the students who had been with you all year had learned. How would you grade them? So they're taking a test in 2 weeks, and this student fails, should they fail your class? Like, whose fault is that? Where is the onus? And what is the system if a student can't come into your class and show growth and knowledge and learning in what they've done in the past 2 weeks? So I think of ungrading as the ultimate differentiation. So working on national boards, I'm working on differentiation, and they're asking me like, how did you differentiate this task that you're having students do? And it's like, well, they literally can do anything on it, and they can show growth in any area, and they're getting feedback from me that's just for them. What more do you want me to do? Which sounds a little bit silly, but yeah, take the grade from the other school. I'm just saying, sometimes I get students who have not had any chemistry, and just because of the other classes they have had, that's where they end up with me too. So it's like, what do we do? Okay, so ungrading. It can mean a lot of things. It's getting kind of hot on Twitter. People throw it out there. I don't think there really is a consensus on what it means. So don't feel like if you're not doing X, you don't get to call yourself an ungrade, or you get to self-identify, and no one can take it away from you. So I really think about students growing from where they are, getting that specific feedback, taking care of their needs. So students that maybe are doing pretty well in the class, or already know things that are that you're talking about, they can't tap out when you're ungrading. You're always pushing them to grow. So they still need to revise, they still need to go to the next level. And students also can't give up, because we do not create hopeless situations in ungraded classrooms. They're never like, there's no hope, I'll never pass. It's like, can you learn one new thing this week? Yeah, you can, and that's great. So just this idea of having hope, and it's not fake hope. It's not like some mythical hope out there. Oh, you'll learn something eventually. It's really this hope that is founded in reality of them getting to do something that doesn't have this fake grade mask on it. Okay. So science, where do we see some great things? It de-emphasizes the right answer. Doing work to get it done. It really de-emphasizes that. It's not about that. I tell students all the time, you don't have to finish that. Did you get it? And I have students now who are finally starting to trust me. And I had a student just the other day, he typed on his assignment for AP Computer Science. He said, Ms. Brown, I totally get how to do this, and I have a lot of other homework going on. I'm gonna skip this if that's cool. I said, yeah, perfect, that's it, that's the dream. So what are we emphasizing? Feedback and revision. So you can't just not do anything, right? Just because you're not giving grades doesn't mean you just get to like sit back and students will magically learn stuff. But it's a lot more fun to give feedback than to give a grade. And also they see that learning is never finished, even for you. I've talked about this a little bit, but I have pretty high anxiety. And because I'm not giving students some big final grade that they might get upset about, we're doing feedback back and forth. So it actually helps me as a human living on this planet to just feel more like we're in sync together growing. Okay, I'm going a little slow, so I'm gonna skip over that. That's kind of more for chemistry people. So what do I think ungrading is? Anytime you can put the focus of the class on the learning and not about the grade, I would say you're ungrading. I think you should remove value of points. And then a couple things that need to get taken care of to ungrade. Teacher mindset. What biases are you clinging to? When you're ungrading and you have a student who's not doing things and you don't believe why they're doing it, or you find like me, I definitely am more apt to believe girls than boys. But when I'm ungrading, it doesn't matter. And I get to feel the feeling and think about my feeling and know that it's only in here and I'm grappling with it and it's not affecting my students because I'm giving them all the same situation. No, I think I have this on a future slide, but people are talking about, oh, give grace when a student asks you for something, give them grace. And I love the spirit of it, but if you give grace when students ask for it, you're only talking to the students who feel comfortable asking you. So how can you design a system that prevents your own biases from hurting students? Okay. And it's hard, but it's so good. Oh, it's really pushed me a lot this year. Student mindset, they're trained. Like I said, students don't always believe me. They're like, but when do I need to have this all done? And it's like, I have told you 30 times, but I will tell you 31, you don't need to, it's okay. They don't believe it. I had we did an assessment because I have to do an assessment for national boards. And we've talked about this in class so many times. And I had a student ask, can I fix this if I don't get a good grade on it? And I had to call her in for a meeting. I was like, we don't do grades. You know this. She's like, I know, but it was an assessment. So maybe we were. No. So you have to help train them and they have to build up some trust. So we'll talk about that. Where am I? Rural high school, 800 students. I teach chemistry, AP chemistry, and AP computer science. I'm the only teacher. So that does make things kind of nice. There isn't another teacher that, you're not really in competition, but students do compare you and parents talk about what teacher they should have. So it's kind of nice being a singleton like that. I teach 140 students, if that helps you think about managing workload. It's my 6th year here, and I have always been known as the weird grader, so they're just kind of used to me at this point. It would be hard if you were a brand new teacher to start this without a fair amount of administrative support. But I mean, fight your fights, try what you can, but you might want to take some time to build trust. How are we doing on time? We're doing okay. I've been through the journey. I did traditional punitive grading. Great. Terrible, actually. I went to standards-based, which still was very founded in what I believed was important in my strict standards. And it also allowed for some mediocrity. They could like get middle of the road standards and get their C and not have learned that much chemistry and not have grown that much, and they got their C and they're fine, which seems terrible. Then I went to mastery base, which forced them to get to a certain level on a certain number of things, which was better. But again, it was all the things I said you needed to. You need to know this about intermolecular forces. And it's like, well, do you really? We went virtual March 13th. I had all these students I was just pleading with them to get things done. I'm sure other people experience this. It was meaningless. I wandered in the summer. And I don't even know I must have read something on Twitter, but I was like, grades, let's get rid of them. I'm done. Let's try it. So what am I seeing since I've been doing it? 2 of the big things are greater student autonomy. So they are taking more things into their own hands, not everybody, but a lot of them, and just more honesty. And instead of an IDK, I don't know how you all feel about the IDK, and I don't know because this doesn't make sense in the context of the last question, or I think I wasn't paying attention to, I'm just getting more honesty of why students don't know something and they're asking more questions instead of just tapping out or just cheating, copying from Google or their friend, just a lot less of that because there isn't a reason to do that. Other things that I think support the work I'm doing, I do student surveys. I do a lot of feedback. I ask for feedback every Friday. They do reflections in these running documents called their thinking documents. That's also where they compare their initial ideas to their new ideas in the unit. We do a lot of model updates and refinements over time. I've really worked on having more relevant ideas, more exciting phenomena to get people in, and a heck of a lot of one-on-one conferencing on Zoom. They sign up for appointments using the Google Calendar appointment app. And this might be a good time, Doran, to pop in that link of my list. If people, I know I'm talking a lot, so I have a whole link. If you need to go read other stuff, I have a document with a bunch of links. You can look at my student feedback. You can look at my surveys. You can read some other stuff. If you're like, you're talking a lot, I'm going to click on some things and read them. Okay. For me, I have no points. Students get feedback on everything. If it's something major, they must act on that feedback, meaning they have to go in and revise. So wasn't doing that at first. And that's a new thing I've done. And I'm getting such better stuff, and students are asking more questions after they've worked on something. Like many of us, I still have to report a grade at the end. And this is kind of the big ungrading question. What do you do at the end? I probably won't do this in the future, but I just decided everyone gets an A. And they're doing it. Well, I shouldn't say it quite like that. If you earn a grade in this class, it is going to be an A because you are going to do these things. And I have those later in the slides. if I had some students get a pass grade and they just couldn't quite get enough things happening, and that's okay. We talked about it and counseled. I think I had 2 students earn incompletes, and one of those is already fixed, versus last spring, I think I had, I don't know, quite a few more incompletes. Okay. AP Chemistry is tracking how they do on standards, whether or not they master them, but has nothing to do with their grade. So if you're in one of those high pressure classes where students need to know something for an exam, which I'm really struggling with more and more every year, but I teach AP Chemistry, so here it is. So they kind of track how they're doing on those, but again, not connected to their grade. Way less copying. Now I'm seeing more wrong answers. I'm still the same person, so I ask similar types of questions. I do some similar activities, and I'm seeing misconceptions take a lot longer to get worked through. And part of that is because they aren't in pods, just getting their answer from the one friend who's like, yeah, I get it. And then they all write it down. And I think they're also just feeling more comfortable with putting their ideas out there and knowing that they'll get feedback and not worrying about that right answer. Also, just way better explanations is what we're seeing here. Okay, I don't know if the people here are feeling this, but you might hear this from a colleague that none of this sounds rigorous. You're just giving them the easy way out, and you're that soft teacher who just wants to be nice, and I'm training these kids for the real world. You might hear that, I don't know. I would say, as a person who has done grading like that, I am pushing students just as hard to do well. Many of them are performing at about the same level-ish. These are new students, but compared to students I've had before, I still have some students who want to game school, but I have a list where I track them if they're not doing what they need to do, and I just am on them. So instead of spending my time writing rubrics and picking out if people get a 5 or a 6 out of 10, I am following up on people who aren't invested in their work, and just digging into that and meeting with them and helping them with assignments and talking them through it and figuring out what's going on in their brain. So that's where my time is going. And I've had some people come around. The last time I gave this similar presentation, I had a student who was still trying to game school. And a couple weeks ago, he sent me an email talking about how he feels like he's actually learning some things in science. Now, he's a senior, but we're cracking the code. And I'm just excited about it. So yeah, that's where a lot of my cognitive load goes to, is the students who aren't doing things. But, and Jordan and I were talking about this at the beginning, there are students who don't do things anyway, whether you have grades or not. And so people will say, oh, you have some students who aren't doing things. It's like, yeah, everybody does. What's hard though, what I'm finding is really difficult, is you just don't have that zero stick. You don't have the consequence of the big F. And so you have to work in different ways to get them there, which takes more work, but I think is ultimately better. So just a student who has been struggling in chemistry and actually has gotten a lot happier, I would say, in the class, just talking about how they're trying to actually understand. It's not about this accumulation of points and vocabulary words, right? They use their time to kind of figure things out. Okay. Other students, so in that right there, if you're like, this is a lot of talking, I want to look at some stuff. If you go to student feedback, you can see I think that was a couple of months ago, I just asked them some questions about how it was going. You will see there was one student who said, there are no grades in this class. And we talk about it every week, which is fun. So I wanted to acknowledge that. Sometimes I hear other teachers talk and I'm like, your class sounds so perfect, and none of them really are. So anyway, there's some truth out there. You can read the feedback from them. So some things that are working here, some Jamboard models from some students we did a couple weeks ago. We watched Chris Hadfield wring out a washcloth on the ISS. And students had to explain what they were seeing, and we had not talked about IMFs or polarity yet. And these are two different models that collaborative groups came up with. After about 3 or 4 cycles of revision, they all rated this as the toughest thing they've had to do all year, and that it was kind of annoying. But then I asked, what will you forever have learned from this unit? And almost every student said that molecules can be polar, and when they are, they can attract to each other. And I was like, okay, great, done then. Check. So I think some things are working, and we're getting some rich ideas out here with students building models, and this was still all virtual. I talked about the toughest part. Again, who deserves leniency? Who do I think is trying? What students do I know the backstories of? So if you think about doing some sort of ungrading or just your future grading system, I would encourage everybody to think about how is it preventing you from making harmful decisions about your students. And we can't always stop those feelings. I mean, we have to work on them, but how can you stop them here instead of here? Okay. And I already talked about the giving grazing. Okay, here's what I told my students about ungrading. First day of class, virtual learning 2020, I asked them to just make a deal with me. And I was like, we're making a deal. I was kind of trying to be under the table and cool, which they probably didn't think I was. But I said, I'm going to push you. I'm going to give you tons of feedback. I don't want to grade a single thing. And I said, I want you to just try, get ideas out there. And that, trust me, I might take that out because it takes so long to get them to trust you, and not worry about what I think the right answer is. And then I say this to students every day, that I don't need a right answer. Get your ideas out there. Don't worry about me judging you. Yep. Oh my gosh, yes, so hard to categorize students, not to categorize students. Yep. And then you get proven wrong and you're like, dang, I was way off. So, okay, so I told students, you do all that and you get an A. And you could, even on Zoom, like I could feel them just be like, oh, an A. Oh, an A. And I went through this and I kind of stopped them and said, that A is external and it has nothing to do with you or me or the value of any of us. It's all to the college, your parents, the people in your life who want to see you succeed, like they're going to see that A. I want us to just not care about it anymore, which of course they don't totally, but I'm still just trying to plant those seeds. Like A's have nothing to do with you being a good person or valuable. So let's just move on from that. And then I just talked about, I'm not going to control you, and let's see what we can do here. They did not believe me. I've said this a few times. They did not believe me. I got so many questions the first few weeks about grades, and it just takes a long time. And I have to tell myself too, sometimes they won't do their chemistry or their computer science because their teacher down the hall assigned a huge thing worth tons of points. And I tell them, go do that. Go take care of those needs that need to be taken care of, and let's have a meeting and do this assignment in 10 minutes together instead of you doing it in 30 minutes on your own. Or don't do this, or let's pick out what's important. And I guess that's kind of my pandemic teaching, because we're all in such situations, but I plan to carry all that forward. Like, why are we stressing each other out, forcing everyone to do every little thing? I just don't see why not. Anyway, they're still super trained, but we're working on it. Adult buy-in, my administration was here for it. Washington is a pretty progressively graded education state, I would say. And I was worried, my assistant superintendent, I was in a meeting with her and she said, I'm so proud of this ungrading thing. I was like, okay, good. I was worried about other teachers down the hall. There are some more traditional teachers, and one of my colleagues outed me. We were out on a walk and he said, oh, Johanna, tell everybody about your ungrading. And I was like, Luke, no. And they all were excited. I was so surprised. They're like, this is genius. So I would say don't be too afraid of your colleagues. Families were the easiest. Nobody emailed me. I sent like so many emails and a survey and all this stuff, and parents were like, yeah, okay, sounds good. Your families might be different. We tend to have a pretty involved parental community that can be really hard on especially new teachers and when teachers try different things, but they were fine. And then just don't be too hard on yourself. You're new. Things are going to suck. It's not going to be perfect. They're going to not do your assignments, but it's okay. And then I don't know if you've heard this, but people do like to make the objectivity argument. I guess I'm trying to prepare you if people don't believe in ungrading and you try it. They say it's not objective. It's just teachers at a whim, especially if you do like some sort of contract grading. So giving everyone an A might not be something that we do all the time. You might contract with students to assign grades. What do they think? What evidence do they have? That's where I'm going to move next year. And is that objective? And just any questions you can ask, like you have two teachers teaching the same class, that's not objective. They have different ways of teaching. Like even if they have lockstep pacing and assessments, they're two different humans. So how is that a fair experience? It's not, right? Yeah, even one teacher is not objective, but yeah, I can, my feelings can change in 5 minutes, right? And maybe I'm just a little bit like, this isn't good, you know? We're making up point values for tests, yes. And across the country, different chemistry classes look different. It's just nothing's objective. So why harm students with this false objectivity of what an A is? I see no reason. Okay. I think we're just afraid of the unexpected. We're so used to grades since the 1890s, right? I love the chat, Lori. You're amazing. Yeah. So when people are afraid of the unexpected, they're going to fall back on what they know. So helping make the outcome clear, walking people through it. I can't read the chat, Anna. You guys are too funny. Yeah, sometimes I go opposite directions so that people get different experiences. This was from a student who was from a different district and really did not like his teachers and had some bad experiences. And he's very obsessed with trusting teachers. And I thought that this was a classic comment from this student. He's like, ungrading will work, but only if you have that trust. And it's true, because students have been burned by people in authority. Well, all of us have been burned by people in authority. They say one thing is going to happen and then it doesn't. And you thought that you were going to learn a lot in this whole ungraded class and nothing happened. So just how are we building that trust? How are we helping students have good experiences with us in kind of our I shouldn't say kind of, but our authoritative position of the teacher. And they're not, I have some students too who are like, but you're not really in charge, you know, that it makes them a little angsty when I'm giving up power. You know, they want that order and they want the teacher to control things too. That's a whole different situation. This is how I did this last semester. I've changed up a little bit. So here's our Skyward graded book. So here's what I did. That learning 10 points is worth 99.99% of their grade. And then everything else, I just tracked whether they did it or not, so that we could see, you know, if a parent wanted to look, if a student wanted to look, hey, you did this, you didn't do this, it's worth 0.01% of their grade. It didn't affect anything. So that was how I hacked the gradebook. What I have changed now is I actually have it kind of counting for credit in the gradebook if it's one of those major things that need to be revised. And so what I've been doing is if it's really gotten far and they haven't done it at all, I have put zeros in this semester because I had some students ask for that. They said that it would help them. Otherwise, I'm just putting in a star, which means there's nothing in there. But they don't get to have a 1 in there, even though it doesn't change their grade. But the 1 goes in after they've done their revisions, because I needed a way to push students to get to respond to my feedback and fix things. Not all, most students do the revisions, but just some of those I needed an extra tool. So I decided to try that out this semester and see how it goes. So I will report back. So far, a lot more revisions, a lot better revisions. So that's what I decided to do. Yeah, as we go to in-person, I'm hoping to switch over to a portfolio. AP Chem is so darn grade obsessed, those students who want to be in that advanced placement class. So they have been the least motivated by learning. You're probably not surprised. And so I promised them that they would be prepared for this exam and that they needed to do some work, but some of them just need me a little bit more to help them be motivated. And we've talked about it and how I would like them to transition away from needing me, but I will help them. So we're reporting things at each term for AP Chem on how they've done in conferencing, because some of them just need a little more accountability, and we've talked about that, so that's okay. Okay, small changes you can do. Do a unit or a project ungraded and see how they feel about it. Get student feedback. Just try it for one thing. Probably don't need to ask permission to not grade one thing in your class, right? Then you could also just do one little assignment and talk about it being a revision assignment with just feedback and see how it goes. Number one thing I would do is just allow for reassessment. If you're like, I can't do any of the rest of the stuff, I would allow for reassessment. Remove penalties from due dates would be some of the big things that I would start with. Okay. So here's the book I was talking about that Susan edited. We've met on Twitter, so I guess I'm going to call her Susan. Dr. Bloom. The Teachers Going Gradeless website is great. They also have a Sunday night Twitter chat, which can kind of fluctuate. I am not using rubrics this year. I don't know if I will. I struggle with the rubric really putting things into too small of a box for my student growth. I really worry about that. I can show you my assessment. I had a deliverables check boxes of all the things that they needed to do. And I like that. And I am down with a 1-point rubric. I agree with that. Did you do this thing or not? Is that even a rubric? I don't know. These words, we're working them the way we want them to. There is a book club with the Ungrading book and a Twitter chat with that, and that's been pretty fun. And then what really got me is Michael Faribaugh, who's also on Twitter, was talking to me about ungrading. He was excited, and he sent me this podcast, Cult of Pedagogy, which I bet a lot of you know, but there was a podcast with Star Sackstein, and maybe this is it for you, I don't know, but it convinced me that it could be done. I always thought it was some pie in the sky. Okay, Monty at Cheney High School is always tweeting about, roses and thorns and smiles and frowns, and I don't know if I could do that in my school, but I could. And Star helped me believe that it was possible, and it could be rigorous, and it could be really meaningful, and that it was okay. From the other side, reporting back that it went pretty well. So and it's a pretty short podcast. There's also a transcript if you would rather read it. And I have some other links on the doc. That's me. You can contact me anytime if you want me to send you anything. Also, I have a student teacher still on this whole ungrading journey, and she just completely bought in from the beginning. I've been so grateful. And she also calls people out in her cohort when they say students should fail. So anyway, it's been quite the experience to talk to her about all of this. So, and I got her on Twitter. So that's what I have. And I'm happy to answer any other questions and have you all talk to each other. Overthrowing education. Okay, I'll have to check that out. So that's the anticlimactic end.
Not anticlimactic at all. It was very good. I have some notes and some things I'd love to touch on, but maybe we can take a few questions first and then get a little bit of think time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's Wanda's asking about based on growth, and I think that if I hadn't decided to go full gradeless, that would have been my next stop. And when the way you asking that question really makes me think about how can I show students and clearly communicate that growth counts. So I'm really thinking about that for next year as I design this portfolio and conference grading. And maybe there can be where did you grow for every single thing in students is really what I'm thinking. Do you have any more thoughts with that, Wanda?
No, I asked that question because I would give students a pre-test, teach the unit, and give a post-test, and try to assign a grade based on how much you grew. And I was always amazed the students at the bottom, they tend to grow the most. The students that were up there at the top already, not so much. But that kept me from giving a lot of failing grades. So as long as you can show me that you did grow, and I can justify giving you a passing grade.
Wanda, I think you raise this point that, Johanna, you hit on that. One is ungrading is part of a larger thing. Ungrading is not a standalone thing. It requires certain things around it. Like trust is huge, and it isn't necessarily the students trusting you initially, just like you said, it's you trusting the students, and eventually, hopefully they will trust you. But if you need to wait for them to trust you, that may never come, right? But like as you were talking, I'm thinking, you know, the idea of students taking advantage of me, you know, the kind of language that we often see that really needs to be removed if we're going to have these types of conversations. You can't really start thinking about that. And then the other piece that you really talked about, one, I think it all centers around humanizing pedagogy, but what Wanda just said and what you've been saying, like in NGSS, especially with modeling, is how many assignments are you going to have that are one-shot assignments, right? And when you think about ungrading, the need to have these multiple, whether we're using modeling or revisions or other things where students can show growth, because, I mean, the other absurdity is we're holding some sort of bar, just like you said, Wanda, you know, who's learning more, the kid that was at the point that had a tremendous gain, or a student that was already high, right, that didn't learn a whole lot. So, right, how do you create the spaces and opportunities for that to happen, to work with that, right? I thought that was really central to what you were saying.
Yes. Sorry, I saw that you don't have access to this. I made a copy and it didn't keep the...
Yeah, I took care of it.
Oh,
I
you
made
did?
a copy.
Okay.
Yeah, I made a copy and everybody can see now. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Some defining growth. So I've thought about this question for 2 minutes while we sat here, and how do you define growth? And I don't have I just have a vibe. That's something I'm really, I think, going to need to sit with. And if anybody wants to jump in, if you're like, this is what I define student growth as, I would absolutely love to hear it.
And Johanna, I'm going to add a question to that, which is, do you define growth based on where a student is and where a student moves from, or do you define growth by some arbitrary measure and how a student is approaching that measure, right? Because that's the other question of, are we building learning around individual students, or are we working towards some sort of arbitrary measure?
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think, man, like I'm into this competency-based idea. Like when I have to do safe schools for the millionth time and I know all of the answers, but I'm forced to watch all the videos, it kills me. It's like, I know all of this, let me answer all the quizzes. Like, why are we doing this? And I know some students feel this way, like, let me just show that I mastered it and move on. And that's where I struggle with classes being this set of things that it's not safe schools. It's not a training for the lawyers to say that you know how to deal with bloodborne pathogens. It's your learning and growth. So if students are taking chemistry, if they already memorized the periodic table because they loved it in 8th grade, I should be able to pull them to the next level. And I don't want to hear a student say, well, I already know this, and so I'm done. It's like, not in this class, Betty, there's a lot of chemistry we can learn. So we're all moving. So I think it just depends upon what the goal of the program or class is. And in this class, I want every student to move forward, move up, move on. Not just hit some goal.
And let me throw one other thing around around learning, right? And thinking about learning a thing or becoming a thing, right? So I think one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is there's something teaching someone chemistry is different than helping someone become a chemist, or see themselves as a chemist or a scientist or something else, right? So with NGSS and other things that are happening out there, I think that should be part of the conversation and part of the question of identity work being central and part of this, right? You could teach a student the periodic table, but that does not mean that that says very little about how they see themselves as a scientist or a chemist, right? So there's some space and questions, right, about students becoming something, and especially with NGSS, with performance expectations, it's moving away from what students know, right, versus dropping some knowledge on a kid in the sense of this conversation.
Yeah, that process. And I would argue that no one has mastered anything. Okay, this is interesting. Just going to read the chat a little bit. And if people want to speak up, or if you have an idea or something, please, I hope you feel.
I was going to say, I threw that stuff in there. If anyone's had any questions about it, it's an online university. It was really cool. I did it I went back to school in my 30s, because I had failed out of college the first time because I hated the whole grading system, and I always knew what I was doing in high school, and I developed really bad habits because I just didn't like working for just repeating stuff just because that I'd already mastered. And so then when I went back to school, I found this university, and they're actually like one of those like kind of weird, not to like do like a self-promo for them, whatever, but they're like the cheapest, best online university you've had, and they're the #1 provider of math and science teachers in urban districts right now, and almost nobody knows who they are. But you would just, when you take the class, there was a list of things you had to do. So it's not completely what Johanna's talking about, but it's like, okay, to get through this class, you have to write 2 papers, take 2 exams, and do 1 project or whatever it was. And if you could do it in 3 weeks, cool. If you could only dedicate like 30 minutes, to whenever, then you did it. But basically, then you would submit something, and they would give you feedback on it, and you would either it was good enough and you got and you moved on to the next thing, or it wasn't, and they would give you things as to revisions. Now, I will say I'm the guy that games the system, because I would look at the rubric and go, okay. And I had like a family and I had a full-time job at the same time. Like, let me shoot for like a C plus B minus. I don't want to turn in something that's an A when the highest I can get is a B. And and so sometimes cool, it was good, and then sometimes they get it back and they go, oh no, dude. And then like I would submit it. The weird thing was they had a grading team. So that got annoying because you would turn something in and they disliked something that someone else liked and all that. But at the end of the day, I was learning, you know what I mean? And that was the goal.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I think there are lots of different ways that we can do this and make it work for different people. One thing, and I just think about, we're all humans, we're all learning, but older people do have more autonomy and more ability to think about what they need to learn, right? When I went and got my master's, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier. I'm so excited and I care. And even though I liked chemistry, I was just trying to get it done. So when I think about young people, I'm anti-learning target. I never want to hear about a learning. I mean, if you have your own idea of what you would like students to get, that's great. But telling students like, this is the target, this is where you need to be, I think is already harmful. They already think when I get there, then I'm done. Or if I can't get there, I'm lost. I'll never do anything. So I'm interested in what Maggie said, if you would be willing to talk a little bit, just these skill-based competencies, because I think that's interesting. And when teachers can agree on, especially some of those skill things, like this is what we're trying to see, it doesn't mean you've mastered it, but in this, you were able to demonstrate this skill that especially people like a science department can agree on to get students to move in. Okay, thanks, Maggie. I would love to hear about these.
I kept myself on mute. My dogs are barking in the background, so I apologize in advance. I have 3, and they're upset that they haven't been inside the house for a bit. So, sure. Well, my position is at the district level, so I'm a science specialist, and I worked along with our ELA specialists and math specialists to develop, and the STEM high school team. So that included the principal and the teachers, to help develop these competencies that were actually skills-based. And what we did is we actually looked at, there's this really interesting Venn diagram that correlates the 3 sets of our standards. So the math, ELA, and science standards. And we kind of looked to see what skills kind of interlaced between all 3. And that's where we had our starting point. And we started to develop based on that. The other thing that we looked at were soft skills that we know are in high demand, that many students are not graduating high school with. You know, the ability to communicate with one another or take on leadership roles. And we embedded those skills and criteria that would allow teachers to gauge growth within the competencies that were taken from that Venn diagram. So it was a long process. It took us about a year, but it was during the process of the high school development. So we opened that school. It was about a 2-year planning period.
Wow. Oh, you got it. Oh, that's so cool. And I think I struggle with forcing teachers to have common rubrics and common assessments and things, but that feels very, I don't know, kind of top down. But when you agree on things and come to consensus on ideas that you want to consistently talk to students about as a team, I'm really into this Venn diagram. Thanks, Maggie.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on, the school incorporated an advisory period. So it's built in within their school day for teachers to meet one-on-one with every student that they have under their assignments, and they go back to this competency-based, for lack of better words, rubric, but it's not really a rubric. It's something that they just are able to have a conversation about in terms of their growth, and you have discussions about what's the plan for you to move along that that competency. So they develop plans in terms of, maybe it's setting aside time to do actual assignments. Maybe it's, reaching out to certain teachers to see how they can make up assignments that maybe are, time sensitive, things of that nature. So it's not just the student reflecting, that's a large component, but there's also, okay, let's develop a plan to move on to and move on that competency scale.
And I just think that's all. Advisory periods are almost ungrading. When you have that special time with an adult that's not grading or penalizing you, I really want to have advisory periods at our school. They're sick of hearing about it, but like that is ungrading right there. It's just that time to get to talk about your growth and not have it be in this whole context of you haven't done this. And I don't know about the rest of your school and how it works, but I just think that sounds beautiful.
Johanna, the other thing that comes to mind with all of this is the notion of becoming, right? Again, when you think about ungrading in the context of, this larger changes, there is no mastery, there is no finality, there is no bar. It's, and again, I work with teachers, right? Who is master teaching, right? I mean, think about most things in the world, right? Wanda's laughing, right? She was teaching longer than I've been alive, but it's not a thing in many things that we do in our life. It's not about this absolute kind of artificial thing. It's about continually becoming better at what you do. And that kind of psychological component really seems to tie in with both what you and Maggie have said ties in with improvement, but really there is no, again, this bar, like once I hit it, I got my grade, I'm done, I can move on to something else, right? It's just not very productive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one thing I didn't talk about that I want to add on there, and it was a slide I kind of skipped over, is I don't know if you have fellow teachers or even yourself at some point have complained about a student grade grubbing, and they're asking about their grade, and the student says, "Oh, I turned this in 3 weeks late. Have you fixed my grade in Sky?" Our thing is called Skyward yet, and it's 3 hours later, and you're like, "Oh," but why? Okay, that's fine. I'll always get a little bit miffed about that and hopefully help them understand that it might take me some time. But the grade grubbers, why do we put that blame on the student? I am sick of it. I committed a long time ago when I hear people say things like that, like, I'm going to call it out, because the student has been trained by us, by our whole system, to value that. And to put that blame on the student is upsetting and harmful, and I'm not here for it anymore. So they're doing what they can to survive, right? Learning is part of survival. Getting through class is part of survival. And sometimes you make decisions. It's like, what's the easiest way I can get this done? Like, I didn't bake a cake for my sister's birthday. Like she said, she wanted me to, I bought one at the store. Like, I just needed to survive. I needed that time back. Humans are always making those decisions. So how do we help students see the value and the survival and the meaning in their learning instead of this grade and blaming them? I forgot I didn't talk about that. Yeah. The moment I decided to ungrade. Yeah. And it's easy to say, oh, these students, they don't value learning. And it's like, well, what have you done and even me, I've said those things before. What am I doing to teach them that learning is the goal and not, you can't just have grades and blame students for wanting A's. Sorry, that was my soapbox. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or needs? Or thoughts? Danny.
Well, I'm just thinking how you're saying in GSS and students can provide so many different modes for their learning, right? And when you're having, and I'm just trying to think of this bigger picture of ungrading falls into this category of really trying to provide genuine differentiation, in particular for my students that have a high needs IEPs and stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I just wonder, how do I have that when I have to give that grade? Mm-hmm. Yeah, how do I actually have them present that? You know what I mean? To me, beyond conferencing.
Beyond conferencing? And I think that's where it's going to come down to giving them a scaffold. I have thought about this. I'm not currently doing it. Giving them a scaffold of options for things they could bring. So show me, one thing we're already doing in their thinking document is I ask pre-questions like Wanda that are really, but they're really open-ended. So tell me everything you know about bonding. Tell me everything you know about why things are liquids versus gases. Just huge stuff. And we usually have each unit creating some sort of initial model. And so I would have them always re-answer those questions, always show revised models or ways your thinking has changed. And I'm not sure beyond that if we need to put a scaffold that's show any work or write about your thinking. And a lot of other people have done more of this work than me. So I don't want to talk too much because there's a lot out there, but so if you want to talk over the summer when I revamp things for 2021, 2022, I would love to engage.
I'm going to be trying here in a few weeks. So what
are you doing, Danny?
What?
What are you doing then?
I'm doing ungrading. I kind of did something similar to you in the grade book. I'm keeping their grades above a 90 and I'm entering zeros for missing stuff more because I had talked to a couple parents and they want to be able to track their students on what's missing so they can see the grade move, but it still keeps it in that A range. And then they'll be doing a self-reflection at the end of each semester for their grade.
Okay.
And so it's just one of those, I'm looking at how do you culminate, 9 weeks worth of work into a one little mini reflection, you know what I mean? And that they can demonstrate their grade. And I think that's my struggle of I don't want them to spend hours on it, but I want it to be more than just 3 words, you know?
So Danny, I've actually been playing around with this idea this year with my AP biology, and this is something I completely stole from Paul Strode, who's in Colorado, and I actually presented with him at NABT this past year. But I do a combination of we call it a bio journal that we run through, and it's a constant sort of little mini reflection. It's kind of when Joanna was talking about the little mini reflection piece, like at the end of the week, I was thinking, oh, if I had them do like a survey at the end of the week, that could build it for them, where they just drop exemplars of something they did that tied one of the science practices we did to one of the learning objectives we did. And so I asked them to try to pull one of those each week, and I build time in the class so they do that. And at the end of the semester, I asked them, how did they do doing their work, and do they have examples of them showing the work? And I would give them feedback. I pick a couple times during the quarter to look through their journals and go, yeah, that's not really that science practice, or I think you need to revise this a little bit more. And then I have office hours in there. So it's very iterative, and you have to check them regularly as you go. And I actually, as Joanna was talking, I was like, oh, I should just be doing this each week, and it would make my life much easier, as opposed to like a giant chunk every 3 or 4 weeks where I'm like spending hours and hours pouring through them and trying to give all of this feedback. But if you do it sort of piecemeal, the grade claim letter they make at the end is 2-3 paragraphs. It's not that long, but they build their reflections every week, and you have that little iterative process, and they're just, again, a science practice, a learning objective. And the kids work their way through it. It takes them usually about a quarter to figure the system out, but by second quarter, they were doing it really easily.
Cool. Yeah, I'm fortunate because our school went to a 3x3 schedule this year. So we finished a one year course in a 1 semester, but I only have 3 classes. So I got to start all fresh 2 weeks ago. And so, yeah. But again, I only have 17 weeks for my students total, and that's it. So.
Hey, Johanna, Jennifer had a question that I don't want to lose in the chat about the portfolios. Jennifer, do you want to speak to that, or?
Oh, no, thank you. No, this is awesome. This is new for me, so I'm learning a ton. I just, you mentioned the like learning log, I think, or something, which I think everyone was talking about. And then you said something about maybe moving to like a portfolio next year or something. And I don't know if that's something that there's already something out there, a resource to look, because that's the kind of thing I've been thinking too. Like, how can students curate their work throughout the year a little bit more so it's more meaningful? And then at the end, it's like, wow, look at all this stuff I did and learned, and how much I grew. And I like that idea. I just don't know much about it.
So yes, there are whole portfolio systems. There are people doing that work. I know that there are blogs on Teachers Going Gradeless about the portfolio system. And what I'm doing in my distance right now is this running Google Doc where they do the newest thing at the top. And it took them so long. I had to tell every student the new thing goes at the top. They're like, oh, that makes sense. Then I can see it. And so I'm not really going to share it because there's no way I can get this student's name off of it. But what students frequently do is they'll put little snippets that they liked from class in there. So they'll kind of take it as their notes, but they'll also put all their model revisions. And then I do these things called thinking questions, where I ask big questions about the unit, the pre ones, the post ones, and ones in the middle. And then I have them go through and I will ask further questions about go back to this date, compare what you said here to what you said here. Talk to me about it. And so kind of what I'm thinking about, Avid does some really cool stuff. So what I'm kind of thinking about their portfolio is this has kind of gotten into a massive running Google Doc notebook. It's not super organized. So I'm thinking about making something more like this for each unit. And with the Feedback Friday I do, one of my plans is for them to talk about their learning that week and have it captured, so that they're not going through and trying to do this checklist and think about, oh, what did I learn? And Lori was messaging me like, why do we have to have a little special task for every little thing? It's like, I I don't think we do. And I would start from less. If you say, student, I want you to prove to me that what you've learned, and not even prove, just provide evidence of your learning and your thinking and what's going on in your brain for this unit as we get toward the end. And if you give them some feedback, like say they have to bring you some of it, I love forcing a rough draft, like a hard rough draft where I walk around and I'm like, where's your rough draft? Let's get it done. Let's work on it. Because I hated doing rough drafts. I think they'll just mostly do it. They will mostly do a good job providing evidence, and then you can just shore up from the end instead of trying to make all these rules and all these checklists and all these things. I would go for, and it might fail a little bit, but I would always start from, let's see what happens, and then figure out what loopholes they're finding and where I want to focus their attention. Yeah. Yeah.
And as the conversation was going, I dropped in the chat the notion of UDL. I mean, at one point I was asking myself, why am I having them doing written assignments? Why does the assignment have to be written? At some point, somebody decided the assignments need to be written versus narrated slides, or some of you point out Flipgrid or a TikTok video. Why do we care about the modality by which students demonstrate that they've learned versus just allowing them the freedom and flexibility to show what, show what they know? Johanna, the other thing I wanted to touch on that you brought up is these LMSs are really not geared towards ungrading, right? So there are a lot of systemic pressures against ungrading. I mean, I'm glad we have a room of highly engaged people, and I'm excited by the fact that, there's momentum around this, and ultimately it helps students learn. But I think it's important to acknowledge that, like, I work with Canvas, and one of the unexpected struggles we ran into is how do I do? So I appreciate the way you've demonstrated that, but these LMSs, you're going to have your own kind of clunky navigation of going through them, because like Canvas wants me to assign a grade. It gets angry at me, right? And then it's like assign at least a 0. So like your idea of assigning 1s for SIME assignments and other things, but know that even the LMS is going to fight you on this because it really doesn't want you to ungrade.
Yeah, and that's a whole battle. I did post, this is totally changing gears. I did post, and I had to do this for national boards, so there's some things in here that you're like, those seem like maybe not Johanna's vibe, but I wrote this assessment with students each picked one option, analytical, practical, or exploratory, to wrap up their learning about, I embedded our bonding unit in the Artemis mission, which really turned into something. So if you're like, why is this all about space? We studied materials in space, and that's where that washcloth getting twisted came from. So just to kind of see how, I think what's interesting is how I just did checkboxes for deliverables, and they got to make whatever they wanted, made some support documents, and you can also see some examples of their thinking questions to end the bonding unit. So you can see, what did you learn about yourself? Compare these answers to what you initially thought. Just kind of, I don't know, kind of interesting. Power School, yep, standard. And even the standards base, our LMS, our grade reporting system has standards base, but it's so Marzano 0 through 4. And again, I think it just further puts people in boxes. I do hope, we are kind of getting close to the end. Dorn and I have been talking about a summer workshop where we basically do this, but people have time in breakout rooms to work on their plans for the next year and bounce ideas off of each other. Is that about all we know?
Well, I mean, it's going to be over 4, right? We agreed on 4. If we're not in agreement, this
I agree.
This is like the public. It could be retracted. It is being recorded, but anyway, we're hoping to have 4 days in the summer where we get together for a couple hours a day and we do the work, such that at the end we have something. Having conversations is important, but getting down to it is really the more critical step. And frankly, we need to show the world that ungrading works and it helps students learn. And I've yet to talk to someone who's ungraded, who's had poor results than when it was grading. So the idea would be for folks like you to come together and we would just work and puzzle through stuff and work through stuff such that at the end of said 4 days and 8 or so hours, we have a syllabus or we have a plan for a class or a unit or whatever it is that folks want to work on, but we have something actionable for next year. Is that fair, Johanna?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I haven't talked to you about this yet, but I think we can figure out for Washington people how we can get you clock hours for that.
Yeah, and on behalf of UCI and the Teacher Academy or whatever else, I'm happy to create whatever certificate reflects that, so it's official and being done through a university. So I'm very supportive of that.
And I guess I do hope if you have ideas or questions that you will email me, even if you're like, I tried this portfolio thing, it's so good. I want to know. So if you're comfortable, email me. If you're on Twitter, let me know. I would love to follow you and hear about your experiences. I know Danny does Algebra 2 too. Liv also does Algebra 2. And Liv got on Twitter too. Yeah, oh yeah. Please drop your handles, go for it. I would love it. And just thank you. I learned things, which I always do. Yeah, thank you. Thanks everybody.
Wanda and Lori, do you want to take a moment to tell us, since you are here and we're grateful to have you, about your sessions and what we can expect to know? You're muted, Wanda.
Hello, everybody. I'll see how quickly I can do this. And let me see.